Good morning and welcome to another weekly update. I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a good week last week. Hope you had a good weekend. I had a great weekend. This weekend was the Viva Explorers Community Day in Manchester. That was a fantastic event. Look out for a video coming from me about that. It was such a good day, honestly. You missed out if you weren't there. So many good sessions. I mean, we were talking about it afterwards, actually. It was the equivalent probably of a week-long workshop, condensed and like the most important salient parts. Every session was up to, I think the longest sessions were half an hour long, maybe 40 minutes, but each one of them should have been a 2 or 3 hour session. And it was really, really good. A really good way of quickly ingesting an awful lot of information, getting up to speed with everything that Viva is, everything that is coming, compliance, how-tos, tips and tricks, governance, like all sorts of things were covered. And it was really good. And so, look out for that video. That will be coming out this week. Other things that have been happening this week that we can get into. The first one to tell you about concerns Azure Communication Services, and they have just published a blog post bringing our attention to some updates for things that have happened this month. And there's really kind of three things that they want to tell us about that have happened, and they are some UI updates and also a change to they have a virtual visit solution, which if you haven't tried it is worth looking at actually, because it's it's kind of like almost like a wizard. You get to fill out some options and then it will create a virtual visits sample for you and you can take away all the code. I have talked about it before and we've walked through it before, but it was quite a long time ago, so it's worth checking out if you haven't seen it. But anyway, let's get to the things that have been announced this month. So the first is a UI library update. Now, previously, like a couple of months ago, maybe we talked about Azure Communication Services adding in support for PSTN and one-to-one calling, outbound calling. This is like a UI update to the UI libraries to support that. So gives you a really nice dial pad that you can drop into your application that users can either kind of press the buttons for, but also you can use you can interact with it as a developer to do lookups against data. So you'll get an event for every time one of the buttons gets clicked, so you can do something with that, like look up the number in a CRM or kind of suggest some options or whatever else it is. So it's a nice integration. It's very easy to use. So if you are building ACS into your application and you want a dial pad, don't go and build it yourself. I'd say go and check out this UI library because it will make your life easier. Okay, that's true for like one-to-one calls. It doesn't have to just be PSTN. It can just be one-to-one or one-to-many calls as well. So a couple of weeks ago, we also talked about rooms in Azure Communication Services, and so this is a UI library update to support rooms, and which is nice. So that's kind of like, this makes using rooms so much easier than it was just even like a couple of weeks ago. So if you are building things out with rooms, this is something you will want to take advantage of. Hopefully you haven't kind of started too much work on your own UI for rooms, because this one will be more supported. It's probably going to be easier to use unless you need something super, super customized. There's no reason not to use this. And then we talked just now about the virtual appointment sample. This update actually brings a post-call survey. Now, I've previously worked in this space around virtual appointments. I know that post-call surveys are really important. It's important to kind of understand from users what happened, what worked and what didn't, and get that feedback back to them. Equally important for proof of concepts actually as well, because you need the data, you need the metrics to prove that the thing you want to roll out, like the virtual appointment system, whatever it is, you need that data to prove and get the budget for the things you want to do, right? So all of that is important. This makes it easy to build it into the sample. So in the sample builder, you can now specify a URL for where to go after the call ends. So you can see here, like this is a Microsoft form. And so actually that's not quite true, actually, sorry. I'm just looking through these screenshots, so I haven't really looked at properly. When you create the sample, actually you put a one question poll and it will create a Microsoft form for you behind the scenes and host that for you. Now, if I was you, I would probably dig into that sample after it had been created, because what you might want to do is send it off somewhere else. And I imagine if you look at the sample, probably what it's doing is just opening that URL. So you should be able to change that and send it off to a different form engine if that's what you wanted to do. Or if you went and looked at your forms, you'd probably find that virtual appointment form and you could add more questions to it as well. So you've got lots of choices there for what to do. I will dig into that if it's kind of complicated, or if it makes sense, I might do a little video or blog post about doing that to see if that makes sense. If that's something you'll be interested in, if you want to do post-survey questionnaires on virtual appointments, let me know, because that's useful feedback. And if it's something people are interested in, I'd like to kind of help if I can. So those are the new things that have come from Azure Communication Services. Now, over the course of the weekend and through last week, I've been looking around. Lots of other things have been happening in the tech space. I wanted to bring you a couple of things that you might not have seen. I think they're still very relevant and useful, but they may well have passed you by. And this is one of those. So, Fiddler. So we all use Fiddler. I do. It's a great tool for debugging. It's a great tool for working with Microsoft Graph and any APIs that you've got, any kind of REST interfaces you have. As soon as the going gets tough and things stop working, you need something like Fiddler to really understand what is being sent, what is being received, why isn't it working, and really get to the detail. And there's a new version of Fiddler out, Fiddler 4.0. It's here and it has some new and interesting features. Now, Fiddler is one of those things where nobody does this, but I think it's hugely worthwhile. And I count myself in that. I haven't done this for a while either, to take a day and really understand the product, really go through all of the things it can do. And I'm hugely guilty of this. I don't do this either, right? So I'm like everyone else, where you just get to the basics and then you muddle along, and because you only use it once every couple of weeks to solve a problem and you're in the flow of trying to solve something else, so you bring in Fiddler and you do it and then you go away again. I do really think it is worth, if you can, spending some time to really understand what Fiddler can do and some of its feature set, and looking at some of the new features in here, because they will really save you time when you need it. So for instance, there's a whole new filtering experience in Fiddler now with Fiddler 4. So make it much, much easier to look for the requests that you are searching for. And I know this is going to be useful because I do this a lot. You're scrolling up and down the capture window trying to find the one message, the one kind of request that you're looking for, because you want to see what the response data looks like, or you want to see what the error was or whatever. So being able to put in really good filtering to really quickly filter down what you're looking for, super, super useful. Being able to save those filters, also very, very useful. You can imagine making up a set of filters for, like, these are just post requests to graph. Like, that would be a really useful filter to have and to save so that it's ready for when you need it. And some other things as well here, being able to kind of copy requests, not just as curl, being able to copy as PowerShell, which is really useful. I'm definitely going to be using that. Very, very cool. And then a whole bunch of other things as well. So I would say take some time, understand what's in this new version of Fiddler, because Fiddler is such a great tool. It is so useful when you need it. So absolutely take the time if you can to really dig into what's going on there, and make sure you get that new version as well, so you're ready with the filters for the next problem you have. Other things happening. .NET 7 is out. Did you see that? Did you miss it? Came out at .NET Conf. Well, I'm not sure it came out at .NET Conf, but the link I want to give you is a YouTube video to the keynote talking all about .NET 7. It is the keynote from .NET Conf 2022. And it does talk about it. And so it's an hour-long keynote, so it is a big chunk of time. It's one of those things, a bit like the Fiddler stuff. It is worth knowing, even though you might feel it's not directly applicable to the stuff you're doing right now. And I definitely feel that. Like, .NET's one of those things where, am I going to be massively impacted by some of the new features in .NET 7 right now? I don't know, probably not, but I also don't know what they are. So maybe I would be. Maybe there's things that would make my job easier, make my life easier and simpler. Maybe there's optimizations there. But also, these are the tools you use. So it is important to understand how they're evolving, even if you don't plan to use them straight away. And you're quite happy where you are. understand what's new. Even if you're not really, really deep into this world, it is worth watching things like the keynotes, just to understand the direction of travel for something like .NET, understand what they're thinking, understand what they're planning on doing in the next couple of years as well. So for all those reasons, I would say go watch this keynote, and then if you've got loads of questions or you're really excited by particular things, then you can dig into the detail. You can go and find the blog posts. You can go and find the deep techy deep dive into like videos and things about all the new features and find out what's going on there. So that is, I think, definitely worth your time, and it's something that I'm going to be prioritizing this week as well to try and make sure I understand. Something else that came out this week. Sorry, 2 seconds. I need some coffee. It's first thing in the morning, Monday morning, so I haven't quite had a chance to have my first cup of coffee yet before I started talking to you. So I'm going to have it now. Okay. New thing, Visual Studio Rollback. So if you use Visual Studio, then this might be of interest to you. If you've used Visual Studio over the years, this might be interesting as well, because sometimes when you update from one Visual Studio version to the next, sometimes there's unintended consequences, and not always Microsoft's fault. Sometimes it's things in your organization, in your team, in your infrastructure, in how your stuff works, in your extensions, in stuff you're relying on. A million different things could happen, and you want to be able to go back to the previous version. And that has not always been easy. You've been able to side by side for a while if you've got the space to do that. But anyway, there's a new feature now called Visual Studio Rollback. And this is a kind of supported, built-in way of rolling Visual Studio back to the previous version in a safe way, which is really nice. So, however, this is not kind of rolled out across the board for all Visual Studios since forever. It kind of starts in with Visual Studio 2022 17.4, and you can roll back to I think you can roll back to 17.4, possibly 17.2. But anyway, I would say just be aware that from now, unless you're on the preview channels and unless you are on doing beta testing and preview testing, if you're like the rest of us, most of us, and you're on the release channel, I wouldn't worry about this for now. Just be aware that going forward, this is something that you may now be able to take advantage of if you want to. The ability to have an update, and then if it didn't go quite right, or if you wanted to go back, if you're missing features or stuff doesn't work, you can then roll back Visual Studio. There are some warnings about things like security updates and what happens with those that are worth just kind of bearing in mind and reading through. But just I wanted to make you aware that this new functionality does exist. It is in the toolbox now. So if you need it, just try and remember it. Oh yeah, Tom said something about being able to roll back Visual Studio versions. I should go and look at that because now I'm in a bind. It is there. You can go and check it out. And so I'll put a link to the blog post that talks all about it. All right, there's one more thing to talk about, and this is kind of nothing it's not directly related to development, I suppose, but I saw it whilst I was looking at the Fiddler 4 blog post. I was on the Telerik website, Telerik blog site, and I saw this and I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was good advice. And this is about tidying up and making time for a seasonal cleanup. And this is something I love doing and I don't do enough, and I should make more time for, and I never do. And it is literally that. And actually, it's interesting because Telerik is one of those places, or Fiddler, sorry, is one of those places where I do need to keep an eye on tidying up, because I don't know if you're like me, but like you come into Fiddler to do something and solve a problem, and then you make a million new tabs, and then you leave it, and then you solve the problem, so you then forget all about it and close Fiddler. What you should do is take the time to save those tabs into a folder structure, into a workspace structure, because you are going to want to come back to them and see what you did and see what worked. And having 100 unsaved tabs across the top, across a million different projects, is not helpful. And this has burnt me so many times. So I do try and keep Fiddler up to date and clean and clear. But this blog post is talking about much more than just Fiddler. It is talking about just taking some time every couple of weeks, every month, whatever, just to kind of do a cleanup. And they're talking about things like not just physical cleanup, which they talk about, physical space, but also files and folders and desktops, and just going through, categorizing, clearing the decks a little bit. Phones, just kind of thinking about home screens, decluttering, cloud storage, making sure it's nice and organized. Email, I'd add on to that things like teams and channels and memberships of specific teams and things like that. So there's lots of ideas to go through in here, but in general, I think it's a good idea. It is a good idea to try and clear your head sometimes. And for me, tidying the physical space where I work, the folder structures of the things I work in, things like email, things like Teams, that really helps make me feel like I'm on top of stuff. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and a bit like you're reactive rather than proactive, try doing a seasonal cleanup. It might just help you. All right, that is everything I want to tell you about this week. Yeah, it's going to be a really good week, I think. Whatever it is you're doing, I hope you have a great one. Don't forget that in about 2 weeks' time, we've got the European SharePoint conference coming up in Copenhagen. That's going to be fantastic. And I'll talk more about that probably next week, but I'm sort of locking in my session for that and thinking about what I'm going to be talking about for that. Yeah, so whatever it is you're doing this week, have a great one, and I will talk to you again next time.